Mark Jaccard is a sustainable energy professor at Simon Fraser University. Now, he's not officially working for any party, but he has answered questions for the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the Greens, and he joins us now from Vancouver. Mr. Jaccard, thank you so much for taking some time. Good to get kind of your analysis on this. And just so we're very clear, you are not working for any party, but yet you have done some work in terms of responding to their questions. Is that right?
Yes, and I've been doing that for 30 years. And so I have done it for the NDP as well, but it just so happens that in the run-up to this election, I've been called by policy people in three of those four parties, not by the Bloc either, although I used to work for Quebec.
Okay, so help
I'm an academic.
You're an academic, people call you, yeah.
Yeah, and they say we're cheap dates because, you just have to take us to a cheap dinner and we'll come if we think you're going to listen to us. So yes, I answer questions on policy for anyone.
Okay, this is our cheap date. We're listening to you now. Give us a sense. What do numbers mean here?
Right. So the targeted numbers, like if you were a naive voter and you said, well, I'm climate sincere, I want to see the most sincere politician. And then you'd say, well, it's the one with the most aggressive target. So that the parties have made it easy for us. It's like the Greens at 60, the NDP at 50, the Liberals at 40. And I say 40. If someone says 40 to 45 or 40 to 100, they'll tell you they've made their target at 40. So I'm not giving the Liberals the 45 there. They said 40 to 45, so the target's 40. And then finally the Conservatives at 30. But of course you shouldn't do that, because the target is meaningless without real policies that a policy modeler like me and other experts around the country, around the planet, will confirm that those policies at those stringencies and levels are likely to meet the target. And then and also can tell you what the economic cost would be.
Okay, so walk me through which party has an actual plan that is achievable.
Right. So first, the key policies are a price on carbon, and you can do it in different ways. Quebec has this cap and trade system, but there are permits that trade, and that's a price on carbon. BC has a carbon tax. The federal government has said we'll have a backstop carbon tax for anyone who's not doing it. So you can put a price on carbon, and then regulation saying you have to sell this many percentage of cars as zero emission, or your grid must be clean, or methane emissions must go down. So it's really the regulations and pricing. So the first thing I do is I look at the parties and I say, have they mapped that out? And so that I or someone else can simulate it. And then I'm going to, as I said, look at the costs. So what I can say is that the Liberals, and I had been evaluating their policies there. They moved from 30% to 40%. They hadn't increased the stringency of policies to get there, but they just did that in the last couple of days. So I can map that out for someone if you want. Okay. The Conservatives also did the same. They've now, at least if they implement the policies in the stringencies that they've laid out, would achieve their 30% target. The Greens and the NDP, it's a little trickier. I'm especially troubled with the NDP policies because they talk about these carbon budgets and not using what are the cheapest ways to do this. They talk about getting a lot of money to spend, and the amount of money that a government spends is not really a good indicator of how they're going to reduce greenhouse gases. And those targets they have, imagine a 50% reduction in just 9 years, or the Greens even a 60% reduction. That's pretty profound when you look around at buildings, at vehicles, at all aspects of industry in our economy, to actually flip it in that time frame. So it gets very expensive with those aggressive targets.
Okay, that's very interesting what you're laying out for us there. I just want to bring the politics into this for a moment, because we're in the middle of an election campaign, let's face it. And if the Liberal Party is out there doing its machinations, they're going to say, well, look at our main competitors, the Conservatives, they're promising a 30% reduction. That would put us behind basically everywhere else in the developed world. It was Canada's old premise. It is beyond. We could essentially be the pariah of a number of other nations that are planning to do this. If the Liberal Party so desired, it could politically use this to attack the Conservatives. So Where do things stand in your mind politically in that vein?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand that that on the international stage, we're still in big trouble, and that's why we have this global problem, and we need all countries to act on it, and we need all countries to be willing to act on it. So that means Brazil can never again elect a Bolsonaro, or America a Trump, or Putin can't be in Russia. Modi in India. So you see the point I'm making. The only way humanity really makes international progress is with some mechanisms that ensure compliance. So some kind of penalty, like carbon tariffs and so on. And so we need countries pushing that way. The Europeans are starting to do that. And both the Liberals and Conservatives and the Greens, as I've seen, have talked about that. But the fact that the Conservatives might get elected and would go to the next COP, the Conference of the Parties, the International Negotiations, the COP meeting this November in Glasgow, and say, we're sticking with the 30%. We know the Liberals changed it to 40. We originally, Trudeau had it at 30 at the Paris Agreement in 2015, but we're going to change it back to 30. I don't think it's as big a problem as people might suggest right now, because basically everyone knows that as long as it's a voluntary system globally, governments change and their level of commitment to reductions change. And so I mean, I can see where the Liberals will say, oh, this is horrible. If you elect the Conservatives, they'll reduce it by 10%, that number. I don't see that as a problem. I do like to see ambitious targets. So I wish the Conservatives were up where the Liberals are, but I'm just pointing out that it won't cost us anything if the Conservatives go there and say, no, Canada's going to stay at that thing we agreed to in 2015 at Paris, which was 30%.
We talked a lot about pipelines during the 2019 campaign, and it started to come up again in this campaign. Liberals bought the Trans Mountain Pipeline. O'Toole has said today he would approve a project like the now defunct Northern Gateway pipeline. Do you, in your world, see a world in which you can be both pro-climate and pro-pipeline?
That's a very good and difficult question for me, because, as I said at the beginning, I'm very interested in prices on emissions, so carbon prices and regulations, as the best indicator of sincerity. And quite frankly, I've looked at the Liberal government's work around the Trans Mountain Pipeline, ultimately buying it, eventually trying to hand it off to someone else. I've seen that as much more of an indication of the needs of trying to get our federation to stay together and not spend a lot of time worrying about separation of Alberta or Quebec or anyone else. And so the pipeline, I'm willing to say, look, the pipeline's a red herring. Really focus on the pricing and regulations that all the parties have. Don't use that as an excuse not to vote for the Liberals. That being said, the reason is that the demand for our oil will depend on global demand, and so that the Trans Mountain Pipeline might get a better price. I am a bit troubled if O'Toole says, and let's build more pipelines than even that, because that gets us back to Stephen Harper, who was very much, we're going to be an energy superpower. And he used the word energy, and like he meant oil and gas, I think, and maybe coal. And it was just flying in the face of where humanity needs to go urgently. So I think it is a bit troubling for Aaron O'Toole to say not only the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which was a big issue in keeping the country not fracturing, but now even additional pipelines, which are probably not even necessary, because I don't think oil sands will expand, at least not if we can get our act together globally, and therefore the demand for oil globally will decline.
Mark Jaccard, thank you very much for your thoughts on this.
You're very welcome.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.